Okay, good morning, welcome, and hope all of us are happy and healthy for today's session. So today we will have a webinar with the title of Future Food, Introduction to Advanced Meat Alternatives from the I3L, from Indonesia International Institute for Life Sciences. And today we are very happy and we are honored to have Dr. Dean Powell and Dr. Wasamon Nutakul from Good Food Institute to share with us about the progress as well as to inspire all of us about the advance of the meat alternatives. Normally, we only think about plant-based meat, but Dr. Dean and Dr. Wasamon will discuss more than just plant-based meat for today's talk. So today we will have, I just opened this Power Talk, and then we will have presentations from Dr. Dean Powell and also Dr. Wasamon Nutakul. And then we will have a Q&A, evaluation, and closing. Due to his commitment, Dr. Dean Powell will leave at 10:15. Later we hope that by 10:15, all the questions have been addressed by all the speakers, yeah. And I encourage all the audience to put the questions in a chat box. So we do hope that you inactivate your audio during the Power Talk session, and please put the comment and the questions in the chat box. And after the end of the webinar, we will distribute the evaluation survey, and we really hope that you fill in this evaluation survey for our improvement in the future. It will not long, it will take only about 2-3 minutes to fill in the evaluation. Our speakers is Dr. Dean Powell, PhD, is the scientist specialist at the Good Food Institute Asia Pacific region, and he is graduated from the Sydney University from the Cellular and Molecular Biology and Agricultural Science, and his work now mostly on the effect of the nutritional status on chicken satellite cell activity and muscle development. Our second speaker is Dr. Wasamon Nutakul, PhD. She is also the scientist specialist plant-based meat from Good Food Institute, the Asia Pacific region. And she has also experience working in the King Mongkut University Technology Tanburi. She graduated from PhD program from the in food science in University of Massachusetts Amherst, and her work or her publication is mostly from more on cell-based studies, yeah, cancer, chemo prevention by dietary compounds, targeting angiogenesis, and inhibitory effects of resveratrol and tyrostilbene on human colon cancer cells, side-by-side comparison. So we are very happy and honored to have these two speakers for today's event. Now I would like to give the screen to Dr. Dean Powell as well as to Dr. Wasamon Nutakul. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Siti, for the introduction. I'm just gonna try this. Can you see my screen right now?
Yes. Yes, it's appear there.
Okay. So it's a full screen now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let me start. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us here today. As Citi have kindly introduced us, we are from Good Food Institute, and today we would like to give you an overview of alternative protein sector, what it is, what it looks like in Asia Pacific, and where we think it's heading. So first of all, I will introduce you to the Good Food Institute, or GFI, who we are, what we do, and why we believe that alternative protein is an important technology for future food security and sustainability. Then we'll briefly cover the technology and progress of 3 different alternative protein technologies. And finally, we will highlight specific resources and opportunities we have that may be of interest to you. For those who may not be familiar with the Good Food Institute, we are a global network of nonprofits accelerating the market for alternative proteins. We aim to develop a roadmap for sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We are completely funded by charitable donations, so we have no specific industry group influencing our focus. Globally, we have 6 offices and more than 100 staff, and we work along 3 pillars, which are science, technology, corporate engagement, and policy. For us in science tech, we work by analyzing current and future technical challenge and address those challenges, tackle any bottlenecks for plant-based, cultivated meat, and fermentation. We also mobilize funding to promote an open access research and early stage commercialization R&D work. We try to inspire future generation by including them through university course development and training materials. Notably, we have recently just launched the first 13-week undergraduate module dedicated to alternative proteins in the APAC region this past August at Nanyang Technology University in Singapore. For corporate engagement, GFI is partnering with companies and investors across the globe to drive investment, accelerate innovation, and scale the supply chain. In terms of policy, we work by advocating for fair policy, as well as a public research funding for alternative proteins. So when GFI was founded 5 years ago, we wanted to answer 2 big questions: how to feed 10 billion people by 2050, and how to do so sustainably, efficiently, and safely. Since we might have known that the current industrial animal agriculture is not sustainable, it's responsible for almost 15% of all greenhouse gas emissions. It uses 75% of agricultural land, yet provide only 33% of the global protein supply. It is also a #1 user of medically important antibiotics. The overuse of these antibiotics increases the chance of disease crossing over from animal to human. This is a major concern for human health, as we have been experienced with the COVID-19. Alternative proteins can help us address all of these environmental and food supply issues. And that's why these are the topics that we're focusing on. With alternative proteins, we can make protein directly from plant with fermentation technology or by using animal cells culture. Plant-based meat recapitulate the organoleptic qualities of meat through plant processing and other plant-based ingredients. These products look, taste, and cook like conventional meat. Fermentation.
Fermentasi.
Fermentation use the hyper-efficient microbial fermentation to either create a whole high-protein meat analog or to produce functional ingredients to be used in plant-based and cultivated products. While cultivated meat is the use of animal cells grow outside the animal to produce a real meat. We recognize that these segments in the market, but foresee that there will be a lot of hybrid product in the future For example, a cultivated fat can be the ingredient in the plant-based meat product to enhance the taste. I will first start our conversation today on plant-based meat, and later on, Dr. Powell will discuss about fermentation and cultivated meat. For the plant-based meat part, we will go through to learn about what is plant-based meat and introduce the 3 stages of plant-based meat study we focus on, including the crop optimization, raw material optimization, and end product optimization. We will then looking into a few case study and example market product of Beyond Burger and Impossible Burger, and we'll wrap up with the market overview of plant-based meat. So what is plant-based meat? By definition, plant-based meat are products closely resemble an animal-based meat product in its organoleptic properties. This means taste, texture, and appearances. They use one or a combination of alternative protein ingredients to do so. In this slide, we have 3 market products. From the left is an Impossible Burger. In the middle, you see Beyond Sausages. And to your right is a product from Dutch company called Oja, which is a plant-based chicken that has the taste and texture of a chicken meat. From the picture, you can see that the appearance and the texture is very closely resemble to that of an animal-based counterpart product. I would also like to clarify that when we GFI discuss plant-based meat, we are not referring to the traditional plant-based protein sources like bean, legumes, tofu, and pei, or even veggie burger. But rather, we are focusing on the plant-based meat that's designed to mimic the taste and texture of animal-based products. We could use, of course, the traditional plant-based protein sources as an ingredient in the making of these new generation plant-based meat. And we will discuss about the method of making these plant-based meat next. At GFI, we're looking at the process of plant-based meat in 3 pillars. The first one being a crop optimization, where you select the right crops, preferably with high protein, less off flavors, easy to process, and optimizing these crops for higher yield, cost efficiency. For raw material optimization, once we have selected the crops, these crops will be separated into different parts containing protein, fat, and carbohydrate. We have to make sure that these ingredients are functional, so they have the best chance of creating a meat-like product. Additionally, other ingredients such as flavors and stabilizer have to be in consideration as well. The last step in the process is the end product optimization. We use the right set of supporting ingredients like carbohydrate, fibers, fat to put together in the formulation and combine that with the optimal processes to create a meat-like product that gives a desired taste and texture. Now let's go a bit into the detail of each section. The first, in selecting the crops. In this table is showing you a different plant-based protein sources. In the first source of plant-based protein are legumes and pulses due to their high protein content. A good example are soy and pea, which are the 2 most commercialized plant protein, followed by upcoming sources of protein like chickpea, fava bean, and mung bean protein. These legumes and pulses contain more than 20% of protein in their composition. The second source of protein are grains, like wheat, rice, or quinoa, which are extensively consumed throughout the world as complete grains. They usually are valued for their carbohydrate parts, while their proteins are treated as byproducts. With the trend of plant-based meat, there are now many companies around the world studying of the way to fully utilize this protein for plant-based meat products. The third source of plant-based protein are seeds, like sunflower, pumpkin, hemp, and flaxseed, which are currently used for their oil, and the protein act as a byproduct. So from the plant-based meat perspective, these crops can be the source of both the protein and fat in the formulation. Final category of plant proteins are from crops that normally has a very low protein content. However, that protein is very functional. A good example is potato, in which a company in the Netherlands have created functional potato proteins that can emulsify, solubilize, and texturize. And these functions can be very useful in the plant-based meat formulation. Currently, most plant-based protein products on the market are soy-based, and we see this as an opportunity to explore the plethora of plants available on the planet. Right now, only a fraction of plants are used in food production, which means there's still a lot of plants to be discovered for its protein sources. This is a big part of crop optimization. By screening through the library of plants with available technology, it allows us to understand the characterization of a crop. We can then select the appropriate crops and improve them so that the raw ingredient inside these crops, like protein, fat, and carbohydrate, are optimized for plant-based meat.
Jangan ada bunyi dong, gitu aja.
The objective of optimizing crops with precision breeding or gene editing are to improve functionality, nutrition, and performance while reducing costs so that our raw material are optimized for plant-based meat production instead of livestock feed or biofuel. These modified crops will provide a good raw material for ideal plant-based meat products. The next step in plant-based meat production are the raw material optimization. Currently, many crops processing does not focus on protein ingredients since they usually are a byproduct of the process. It is therefore important to design fractionation and purification methods that focus on protein and will reserve the functionality of the protein for the plant-based meat production. A functionality we would like to focus about is something like water holding capacity, oil holding capacity, emulsification, and gelation should be in consideration when designing a fractionation step. In addition, functionalization step can be included in these raw material production processes. Here is a quick example of the processing of plant proteins. So when you receive the crop's material, these will be separated and cleaned into hulls and stem and seed. The seed will be milled, extract for their lipid content, and through a variety of processes, reduced into a flour that can be further fractionated for protein concentrates, isolate, or in some cases, hydrolyzed isolate. In addition, these steps also result in starch, sugar, and fiber commodity. All these ingredients can be used in formulating a plant-based meat product. The last step of plant-based meat production is the end product composition and process optimization. In this step, we need to establish the correct mix of ingredients and processes to create the desired taste, texture, smell, and structure of the target plant-based meat. We need to know how each ingredient interact with each other and how they respond to a restructuring processes. The knowledge of food chemistry, food processing, and engineering are crucial for these steps. For the restructuring process in plant-based meat, the extrusion is the most common technology. In this picture, you can see that the raw material is fed through the top of the hopper, and it will travel through the barrel where it gets mixed, heated under pressure, and then it will be cooled at the cooling die units. That's happened where the restructuring happens. The product would then be cut into desired pieces and kept frozen. In today, the industry primarily used these low or high moisture extrusion to restructure plant protein into a texture and meat-like ingredients. That is then combined with fats, flavor, and other ingredients to create plant-based meat products. However, these extruders are currently relatively expensive and require considerable amount of expertise to operate them efficiently. So the question is, can we innovate to create a more sustainable, efficient system? And we're beginning to see an advance in these areas. A good example here is some technology that has been applied to produce plant-based meat product. The Shear cell technology with the leading study in Wageningen University in the Netherlands have studied the use of shear cell technology depending the shear force to create fibrous plant-based meat structure. While the 3D printing has also been applied to plant-based meat production, where you see several startup companies in Israel, such as Redefine Meat and Nova Meat, uses this technology to form a whole cut piece of plant-based meat. However, these technologies are still at a smaller scale and will need scale up to be able to create affordable product for consumers. In addition to protein, we also need to consider other ingredients in formulating plant-based meat product. Some of the examples are oil source. Canola oil and coconut oil are relatively popular in use in the formulation. Binders, and this can be starch, fiber, and gum to give you the stability of the mix, and also color and flavor. Some of the good examples are beet juice or soy-like hemoglobin that Impossible Food use in their burger patty. The end goal of these ingredients is to increase consumer satisfaction when consuming the products. Once we have the finished product, we need to test whether this product will perform well in the market. And several methods are needed in evaluating this product performance. The methods such as texture analyzer or rheological testing and gas chromatography for flavor analysis are an example of quantitative methods that can be used. We also, of course, use a sensory panelist to analyze whether these products will perform well in the real market. So this kind of sums up how we can go about making plant-based meat products. Let's explore next of some example and the market trend. So Impossible Burger is one of the flagship products of this industry. It is a plant-based meat and fermentation-based beef-like burger. It contains 21 ingredients, and we will explore next of why is this 21 ingredient is included in the product. Breaking it down, you can see that these ingredients fall into a few different categories. It either acts as a protein source, a fat source, binders, coloring agent, flavoring agent, enhanced nutritional profile as vitamin and minerals, and also acting as preservatives. Some ingredients, of course, have more than one function. For example, like hemoglobin that used for both the coloring and the flavoring of the Impossible Burger. The Impossible Burger also used a few natural preservatives. It used the cultured dextrose as an antimicrobial use to inhibit spoilage bacteria, while vitamin C and E are antioxidant that works to delay oxidation and help extend the shelf life of the product. One interesting point I would like to point out is the source of the fat that they choose is the coconut oil. Since coconut oil solidifies at room temperature, when you actually combine coconut oil in your formulation, you actually get this white speck that resemble the beef fat in the burger patty. So all of these ingredients has been considered to add a small things into this product so that the consumer will have a high acceptance of this product. Let's look at another flagship product, which is the Beyond Burger. Similar to Impossible Burger, after water, protein is the main ingredients of this product. Different from Beyond Burger is that instead of using soy protein, Beyond Burger choose to use pea protein and other plant protein. Breaking it down, again, you have a protein source, fat source, some functional, meaning they act as stabilizer or binders, and then you have color and flavor. By just comparing these two product, you can see that you don't need to use the same ingredient to achieve the product. There's no one way or no right way to achieve your finished product. Using the knowledge in plant biochemistry and food science, and sometimes biotechnology knowledge, you can design your finished product from the variety of ingredients that's already available in the market. So the plant-based meat market is very exciting at the moment. The market itself is being built both from traditional food company and Generation X companies. So looking at this picture clockwise, we have the end product companies such as Impossible Burger, OmniPork, and Nova Meat, which produce the finished product for the consumer to purchase and taste. And also we have the side of technology where you have company working on improving the process of making plant-based meat. Some examples are Rival Food, who specialize in shear cell technology and developing it for whole cut meat products, and Cholesterol, who has expertise in extrusion technology. Last but not least, the ingredient company. This big giant ingredient company has stepped into the market of plant-based meat. DuPont has already been well known as one of the biggest supplier of soy protein. They also have stabilizer system, and they invested quite a lot into the plant-based market. AAK is a supplier that specializes in functional lipids, which provide flavor and juiciness to the plant-based meat product. I would also like to mention Motif. They have just recently successfully produced a cow myoglobin to be used as a flavoring and coloring agent in the plant-based meat product. Also, it is worth mentioning some exciting partnership that's happening. Givaudan, which is one of the big four flavor house, have collaborated with Buller, which is one of the biggest manufacturer of extrusion technology, to build a protein innovation center in Singapore, aiming to facilitate clients' interest in developing plant-based meat protein products. With many exciting activity in the space, it is not surprising that we see an upward trend in the food service and retail market. This graph shows the increasing restaurant adoption of plant-based meat in the US. Back in 2017, Burger Fry was the first restaurant to adopt Beyond Burger on their menu. And fast forward to 2019, where this adoption has skyrocketed with Burger King adding the Impossible Whopper on their menu. Subway and McDonald's also adopt Beyond Meat products on their menu. Similar trend can be observed in the retail sales. Way back in 1977, only Morningstar had plant-based burger as a product in supermarket shelves, while today you have in grocery you have multitude of plant-based products, from plant-based beef patties, grounded meat, and chicken alternatives from different food manufacturers. The same sharp upward trend we see in this restaurant sector. Now let's look at a little bit closer at home. These are the plant-based meat competitive landscape in APAC. This does not cover everyone in the radar, but it just gives you some good example. So we can see how it's evolved from the veggie brand that were catered towards vegetarian and don't recapitulate the taste and sensory experience of meat, to the popping up of 2.0 alternative protein in different Asian countries. OmniPork, Karana, and Let's Plant Meats are some of the few examples. A larger consumer goods company in Asia also started to join the trend. You can see Thai Union and NRF start investing in plant-based meat. International startup also start entering Asia, where Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger launching their product in Asia. And In a similar trend, bigger international consumer good companies or even some leading meat companies are entering Asia with their plant-based meat product. As we know for now, like in 2020, Cargill and Unilever have launched its plant-based meat product called PlantEver and Vegetarian Butcher, while Nestle have launched a plant-based Milo in Malaysia back in the beginning of this year in April. And Tyson, which is one of the biggest chicken processor, have launched a plant-based first fry in Asia just in this past June. Looking at the restaurant side, similar to the US, plant-based products are becoming more mainstream. As you can see, its availability at the quick service restaurants such as Burger King, Taco Bell, Starbucks, and even KFC have the offering of the plant-based meat on the menu. So as you can see, this is a very exciting time for alternative protein. And with that, I would like to pass the stage to my colleagues, Dr. Powell.
Thanks so much. And so as you can see on the screen now, we're going to jump over to fermentation, and then I'll talk a bit about cultivated meat after that. So fermentation, even though it's a very old technology for use in food, in recent years has been really emerging as a key enabling technology when we look at alternative proteins as a sector. So it's been increasingly used for creating ingredients such as soy legume globin that was already mentioned, but also standalone products just using the fermentation ingredients themselves. And so this leverages microorganisms like fungi and bacteria. And so just basically, when we talk about microbial fermentation, this is the cultivation of microbial organisms, and this is typically including single-cell organisms. So specifically here, we have bacteria, yeast, and algae, which you can see on the screen. But it can also include organisms which are multicellular, such as filamentous fungi. Slide, please. Thanks. So fermentation can be used in the alternative protein industry in three ways when we view it from our perspective as GFI. So the first is traditional fermentation, which has been around for centuries, where you use microorganisms to modulate or process plant-derived ingredients. So tempeh, which would be well known in Indonesia, is an example of this, where it's fermented soybean. The next pillar we have is biomass fermentation. So this leverages microorganisms' fast and very efficient growth, as well as some microorganisms' high protein content to produce large protein quantities quickly and efficiently. So Quorn is the leading example of this. They're owned by the Filipino company Monde Nissin, and they've been the world leader in this sector for decades. But some new startups have entered this space in recent years to create some competition. And finally, what I think is the most exciting element of fermentation is what we term precision fermentation. So this is where you use the microbes essentially as tiny factories to produce specific functional ingredients. So this often utilizes genetic modification of the microbe to produce animal products. So you're inserting a gene that is typically expressed in an animal and making the microbe express it instead. So for example, there's a company called Perfect Day, and they use yeast to produce dairy proteins, and another company, Clara Foods, does something similar where they're producing egg proteins through yeast as well. So using this method, you can perfectly recapitulate animal ingredients without the animal, and often, or when these processes are optimized, it's also much more efficient to do it this way as well. Slide, thanks. So although fermentation, it's a relatively mature platform from an industrial sense, for using it for alternative protein applications, this presents some new challenges as well as opportunities. And this is particularly relevant for the biomass and precision sectors. So every step of the chain presents new opportunities for research topics for students such as yourself to potentially consider. So if we look at the overall process on the screen here, your first consideration is going to be at the end, where we need to define what we're actually interested in producing. So that's your ingredient, whether the whole biomass that is the protein mass of the microbe itself, or for precision fermentation, what ingredient do you actually want to produce? And so based on this, you then need to choose what's the best performing microbe that can create this product for me. And you can optimize this through strain selection, so looking at different types of microbes, but then also adaptation and screening and engineering of a microbe that you think is a good choice to make it grow faster or grow at different temperatures. So it can be done at high temperature, which makes the process easier because you don't have to worry about contamination with other types of microbes that you don't want to grow. And then from this point, you then also have to consider the feedstock that you'll actually feed to the microbe to make it grow. So this is the nutrients that are going to support the growth. And feedstocks are a major cost driver when you're looking at fermentation process industrially. So a great deal of optimization is possible in engineering industrial scale production processes, particularly if you look at the idea of using side streams or waste streams from other industries. So this uses ingredients that previously might have only been used for low value applications, such as animal feed. So brewers spent grain is an example of this, where the grains left over after beer production currently are used for low value applications, but these could be used as feedstocks for microbial fermentation to produce higher value products. And then once you've got your feedstock in your organism, you then have to look at the production process itself. And you can further optimize the growth conditions here. And this is very specific to whatever microbe and feedstock you're going to be using. And then at the end, you might need to look at purification and formulation of the product once you have your ingredient to get the desired product with the right yield and quality. Thanks. And so an example, if we look at precision fermentation specifically, is what Dr. Nutakul mentioned before, is soy lipoglobin. So this is Impossible Foods ingredient that they've designed and patented and used in their beef products. So hemoglobin, you might know, is found in your blood. It transports oxygen from your lungs to the rest of your body's tissues through the circulatory system. It also gives blood its reddish color. And as you can see on the screen here, soy hemoglobin, which is a plant variety of hemoglobin found in soy plant root nodules, is also red. So Impossible Food discovered that just like hemoglobin can be used to give plant-based beef products that red color and slightly metallic taste that is really signature to beef. And because the amount of hemoglobin in plant roots is relatively low, they actually look to produce it recombinantly by inserting that hemoglobin gene into yeast to produce it through fermentation. So this is an example of precision fermentation that's being used commercially today. And then if you look at this graph on the screen, this is just looking at how the industry has been growing in recent years. So I mentioned it's a relatively young segment of alternative proteins. GFI didn't consider it one of our pillars until about 2 years ago, but it's had rapid expansion in recent years. So in the last 2 years alone, we've seen a steep launch of new companies, and we now, well, as of 2020, we had recognized 51 worldwide. I know there's been a number since then that have popped up as well. And then on the next slide, we've also broken those down into companies based on their region that they're located in and their application as well. So just an example of how this has changed since we did this, I know in Australia, for example, there's 4 companies now when there was only 1 when we looked at this in early 2020. But of note, you can see that there's a lot of companies in the United States and Israel, but within the Asia Pacific region, we're really underrepresented. So there's a couple in Singapore. If you consider Australasia, I think there's about 5 or 6 now between Australia and New Zealand. But we're really not seeing many other fermentation companies targeting this niche with an Asian perspective. And that's really important when you consider that dietary requirements, the types of meats that are predominant, are different in different regions. And within the Asia Pacific region, each country has its own preferences, which provides research or business opportunities to try and target them through the use of fermentation technology. So slide, please. And again, so now we'll just look at cultivated meat and go over that quite quickly. So I'll just start very basically for those that might not have heard of cultivated meat before. It's also called cell-based meat. In the media, it might be referred to as lab-based meat, although we don't prefer to use that term as it's not actually representative of what this technology will look like once it's commercial, as this won't be done in a lab, it'll be done in a food factory, similar to many of the foods you eat today. So really briefly, cultivated meat, it's a process that utilizes technology and techniques that have been used in the medical cell therapy industry, and is coming into the foreground as kind of a really emerging area for advanced medical technology. So cultivated meat is produced by taking a biopsy from an animal. So on the slide here, we have a chicken as an example. And so generally you want to be taking a skeletal muscle sample of the animal, because that's the skeletal muscle is what provides the meat. And from this, we'll isolate the cells that we're interested in growing. So these are generally going to be muscle cell types, fat cell types, and connective tissue stem cells, because these are what give rise to the muscle, fat, and connective tissue in the meat that we eat. So once we've isolated these cells, we then grow them in a nutritional liquid media broth. So we have that in the bottom left there, which is labeled the starter cell culture. And so this media broth, we refer to it as cell media or cell culture media. And if you're looking at this from a research perspective, that's a very widely referenced and considered area of study is cell media and cell culture. And here, the main advantage of using these cells compared to growing other materials or growing an animal is that cells can multiply or proliferate very rapidly and efficiently. So once we've isolated the cells and have them in this media broth, we then culture the cells in conditions that allow them to proliferate or multiply efficiently until we have as many cells as possible, or as we can hold in our system. And these cells are then cultured in a different type of media, which we call differentiation media conditions. And this signals to the cells that we've now proliferated to high numbers to turn from their stem cell form into their adult skeletal muscle tissue or fat tissue or connective tissue. And we can then process these differentiated tissues using more traditional meat processing techniques into the final products that we'll sell and eat in restaurants or in our homes. Slide, thanks. So similar to fermentation, the cultivated meat industry is quite young and accelerating very rapidly. So on this graphic here, you can see in 2013, we went from the first cultivated meat burger produced by Professor Mark Post, and that cost about $300,000 US to produce. Based on that example and that research, we had the first companies being established in 2015. I believe there are 4 cultivated meat companies were established in that year. And rapidly from that point, we've gone to the first commercial sale of cultivated meat, which was actually quite close to where you're all located, as it was in Singapore, which was the first company or first country in the world to provide regulation for the sale of cultivated meat. And last year, we also reached a milestone of having over 70 startups worldwide working on cultivated meat, as well as 40 established companies, mostly life science companies, that have announced they have a line of their business dedicated to servicing the cultivated meat industry as well. We've also had some really big funding milestones in the last couple of years. So last year, we had 2 Series B raises, which is an investment term, which were over $260 million US. So there's a lot more money flowing into this sector now. And so while there's been a lot of momentum behind the growth of the industry, it still has a long way to go in terms of scale up. And so it's going to require significant funding, capacity building and infrastructure, as well as technical optimization. So there's going to be increasing commercial opportunities in this sector as a lot of the technical hurdles are figured out, and we can actually begin to produce this in larger quantities and have to scale up this production around the world. So although there's a number of challenges, we've commissioned some independent research to look into the viability of cultivated meat becoming commercial successes. And our analysis showed that it is a feasible technology, and it will be able to reach the market without the need for any moonshot scientific breakthroughs. So there are no hurdles that seem insurmountable that we haven't figured out a pathway to overcome. And so this year, we do expect some products available for purchase in limited quantities and potentially in more geographies than just Singapore. And we're also seeing more pilot scale proof of concept facilities. So pilot scale being still quite small, but able to produce small commercial amounts of products for sale or tastings. And so then as we go through over the next 5 and 10 years, we're expecting to see more regulatory approvals in different regions around the world, as well as significant cost reductions, which I'll talk a bit more about in a few slides. And then by 20 metric tons of cultivated meat products. And so on this slide, just so you can actually see what some of these products look like, these are just a few prototypes. So I already mentioned this image on the left here. This was that first burger created by Professor Mark Post in 2013. So that, I believe it was just that burger or that plus 2 others is what costs $300,000 US. And then on the top right, we have a prototype by Memphis Meat, which is now known as Upside Foods. They were one of those first companies that started in 2015, and they're currently the largest company globally. And that's a cultivated beef meatball. And then on the bottom right, we have a prawn dumpling. And this is actually made by a Singaporean startup called Shear Meat. And so they're the first cultivated meat company in the world to look at, in the seafood category, looking at prawns, lobsters, and other shellfish. And that's one of the advantages when companies located in the Asia Pacific region are looking at more regional appropriate business ideas. So all of the first companies were looking at beef and chicken, as they were based in Europe and the US. But the first companies in this space in Asia were looking at seafood as a much larger market segment here that until that point was untapped. If we have on this next screen here, just some comparisons to think about how far costs have dropped. So again, the black line here is a indicative of costs of cultivated meat production based on several companies' stated pricing achievements. And sorry, this is in US dollars per pound, but I have done a conversion for kind of where we're at the moment to make it a bit easier to understand. So the start of that black line there is, again, Mark Post burger in 2013, it's about $300,000. And then over the years, we've seen several different companies announcing their price drops. And you can see that from 2013 to 2021, there's been a very magnitudes of drop in the cost. And so that final product there, which is made by Future Meat, where they have a chicken breast, I've converted it so that what we have as the price of D there, it would be 1 million rupiah per kilogram of chicken. So it's still quite high, but it has come down a long way, and we believe that there's a lot of potential for that to continue to drop. And this is just a comparison to that line in blue, which is actually the cost of sequencing the human genome. And that's interesting, as this was another area that was really technically uncharted waters. So the first human genome cost $1 million US to sequence. That was completed in 2003. And at the time, some senior academics in that area put out scientific publications, and one had a prediction that they thought in 30 years' time, or by 2030, that we could get the cost of the human genome, sequencing a human genome, down to $1,000. Based on that prediction, we actually got there 15 years earlier. So we reached that price for a genome sequencing by 2015, and it's still been dropping from there. So this was just an example to show that although technologies can appear very expensive and very daunting, once enough brain power is put to them, prices and challenges can be overcome very quickly. Slide, thanks. So I mentioned there's over 70 companies globally now working in this space. Similar to the plant-based, there's a number of multinational ingredient companies as well. And these are just some of the examples relevant to the Asia Pacific region. So many are in Singapore, but some are in Hong Kong. There's also a few in Australia, but none in Indonesia as of yet. And when we, on the next slide, thanks. When we look at this from a research perspective, if you're looking to do more scientific research as a student, honors, PhD, we can kind of split the research in this area into three pillars. So the first is tissue engineering. So this is where we're actually looking at how do we form the basic tissues of meat. And this relies on our kind of basic biological knowledge and cell culture knowledge being really critical here. But once we've figured out from a biological perspective how to grow these tissues, we then need food engineering to optimize that tissue as a food product. So we have to make sure that we align these biological processes to grow the tissues with food science expertise to make sure that they have the right flavor and texture to mimic the traditionally grown meat equivalents. Then finally, we have to consider the bioprocess. So this relates to the scale up of growing these cultivated meat products to make it relevant as a large scale food ingredient. So this is where there's a lot more of a focus on engineering, and bioprocess is actually the area where we're going to need the most developments in coming years, as this is still the most uncharted territory. And then just if we go to the next slide, we'll really quickly try and talk about where we're headed and leave some time for questions after that. So next slide, thanks. So when we look at alternative proteins as a whole, we at GFI and many in the sector believe, based on studies and conversations with consumers, et cetera, that taste and price are the key factors influencing consumers from trialing or continuing to consume these products. So this is a departure from previous efforts where vegetarian alternatives are focused on ethics or morals to try and get people to reduce meat consumption, but it's now seen that really we need to work on taste and price as the main factors to get a larger amount of people to consider these alternatives. So perceived taste and price are among the top reasons consumers either do not eat or will not try plant-based foods, specifically in this case, but it's relevant to all three pillars. So we know that more R&D work is needed to get this taste to parity with traditional products. And average prices for plant-based meat are still about 1.5 to 2 times as high compared to traditional meat products, but those prices are dropping considerably, especially as these early mover companies are scaling up. So again, going back to Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat, as their scale has grown, they've each been dropping their prices significantly, at least 2 or 3 times they've done, about a 10% or more price drop for the consumer in the US and globally. And so another related opportunity when we think about taste and price that I already mentioned is targeting local flavors and dishes to improve market penetration. So again, in Indonesia, there's really only one main plant-based meat company, Rebel Food, at the moment. So there's a real opportunity if you look at Indonesia where not many companies are targeting that niche. And then on the next slide, again, if we look at the Asia Pacific region as a whole, nutritional value and health considerations are also very important and much more important than if you look at the US or European markets in particular. And so this image on the screen is actually from a study looking at China, which showed that low fat and additive-free claims were rated most highly, even above protein content or taste and texture. And then on the next slide, just to kind of give a bit of sense of how this market has been growing at a rapid pace. So globally, investment in alternative proteins in 2020 was $3 billion US. And that was a 3 times increase from 2019. But if we look just at the Asia Pacific region, as we can see on the screen here, there was actually a 6 times increase in investment funding for alternative proteins in the region between 2019 to 2020. The majority of that's still in the plant-based sector, then cultivated, and there's a really small sliver in there that's hard to see, that's fermentation, which kind of represents that, that's still the most emerging of the 3 sectors. And then on the next slide, just going to those production costs. So this was an analysis by a group called Boston Consulting Group, and they were just modeling how we see price parity timelines for these 3 technologies. So plant-based meats are really close to getting there. So in the next couple of years, we'll see that, followed by fermentation slightly after. For cultivated meat, it's probably still going to be at least a decade or more before we start potentially seeing price parity for some cultivated meat products in some markets. And it's important to note that this will be targeting probably the higher end types of products first. So, replicating like a Wagyu steak, for example, where the price for that is much higher. So it's more achievable to meet that. And then just on the next slide, I want to put in a little bit of data just looking at consumer acceptance of these products in Asia Pacific. So some analyses have estimated there'll be a 25% increase in the market size for plant-based meat to $1.7 billion over the next 5 years, the whole Asia Pacific region. And they specifically called out, for example, there might be a 200% increase projected for China and Thailand. And about 75% of consumers are willing to pay similar price for conventional meat for plant-based alternatives. And if taste and price are equal, a majority of survey respondents in some countries would actually prefer their meat to come from plant-based sources rather than animals. And just on a final note on this, to look at it from the alternative perspective, there are some threats to meeting these targets. The three big ones that we see in Asia Pacific are a lack of infrastructure. So for us to get to the scale that allows us to bring costs down and get more acceptance, we currently don't have the infrastructure to achieve this. And this is going to require investment, training of skilled individuals, which I'll get to in that third point there, and support from governments to help make this happen. So the second point there is regulatory hurdles. Many of these products, pardon me, are novel foods. So we need to make sure that the regulation of governments is suitable to approve these products in a timely manner, and also have the appropriate food safety regulations so that they can be sold. And then on the talent pipeline, we see that there's going to be a need for a lot more skilled researchers, as well as business professionals, and those that will actually work in the production facilities to produce these products, as it's going to be new skill sets and require different knowledge. And as Dr. Nutakul mentioned, we've actually started a course in Singapore this year to help bring about that change, and we're hoping to see this type of content included in more universities around the region. And so just to finish, I'll quickly talk about some of the resources and opportunities that we at GFI provide. And as we are a nonprofit, all of our resources are provided for free. So just to highlight first, we really see the importance of universities in accelerating the alternative protein sector. So the first obviously is on education. Again, we want to see more classes and majors to train the scientists and engineers to take part in this industry and succeed. So I've talked about our course in Singapore, but around the world, in Europe and the US particularly, a number of universities are now bringing in more course material and focusing more on this sector. And that then flows into research. So we actually fund research projects ourselves, which I'll talk about in a sec. But we see there's still a real critical need for basic research done at universities to support this sector as a whole. Individual companies are doing their own R&D internally to develop their products. But for the whole sector to succeed, we need universities to continue providing the knowledge base that all companies can share to build on for kind of shared innovative success, which is that third pillar where we really need this research to lead to commercial technological innovations to accelerate the acceptance of this sector. And a number of the startups that are emerging around the world are being started by university researchers and students who do some of the basic research and then take those findings and apply them commercially. And finally, there's a real need for community building. So a lot of the scientific expertise underpinning these technologies exists in different medical or other food-related silos. And what's really important is an interdisciplinary approach where we can mesh these different technologies and approaches to be real force multipliers for the field. And students can be really important there, where they can, if you're interested in this and you might know a lecturer or a researcher that seems to do relevant work, you can let them know about us and our funding in particular, and maybe see if they'd be interested in pursuing this as a different research focus. And on the next slide, I'll also just point out that we actually support a global community of universities. We have what we call an alt protein student project. So in particular, we have been supporting these 16 universities around the world with student alternative protein clubs or programs. We're not bringing any new ones on at the moment, but on the next slide, we do have a link where students can go. So if any of you are interested in how you could build a career in this area, how you could build your knowledge in this area, if you follow that link, there's a number of resources that are aimed towards students. And on the next slide, I mentioned that we do have research funding. So at the moment, we have a grant call open right now. And I will put a link in the chat where we will be hosting a seminar next week to talk about our open grant call. I'll put that in the chat after I finish talking and I figure that out. But so this is for projects up to $100,000 US, and we have a few specific topics that we're looking to focus on. So if you are a researcher or if you have a lecturer that may be interested in this, please let them know about our webinar next week. That'll be free to attend, obviously, and learn about our whole grant program and how our funding works. It is available to any university or company anywhere in the world, as long as you fit within our grant provisions. So it's very open access for anyone to attempt to utilize. And then just really quickly on the next slide, we do have a range of industry-focused resources for those that are looking at this from a more commercial perspective or from an entrepreneurial perspective. So please go to our website at gfi.org to find all of those. And then on the next slide, we do have a number of technical resources as well. So we are a think tank and we do a lot of strategic analyses to point out where are the key gaps, both from a research perspective or from a business perspective. And we try and push or highlight these opportunities to individuals to conduct research, start companies to fill these gaps and help accelerate the whole industry. And with that, I'll just say thank you for your attention from both of us. And I think we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for the, wow, it's a very comprehensive presentation and also very complete, yeah. I'm just imagining that, so in 2025 or 2030, we can buy this alternative protein as if we buy tofu or tempeh, maybe at the price of that, yeah?
We hope so.
Yeah. So we have quite a number of questions. And the first one is from Mary Lianita. She thanks for the excellent presentation. I think all the audience agree with us that you already gave a very excellent presentation. So the question is that looking at the ingredients of the Impossible Burger, they have a long list. So will this create negative perception among consumers or maybe perceived as unnatural? How would GFI and partners address this issue? Please.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. And yes, it's possible that the consumer will perceive these as highly processed product. However, there's several companies actually working on ingredient innovation to make them more clean label and more consumer friendly. In addition, it is important that we educate the consumer to understand, the ingredient that goes into food product and have a better judgment of which is healthy and which is unhealthy.
Okay. So then there is already effort on that, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wasamon. Now we have another question from Kevin Nathaniel. Kevin, he's also our student. He mentioned that I would like to ask, I ever tasted plant-based meat from Burger King, and what he remembered, the texture was being crumbly, flavor was mild, smell was horrible, although the color is close to similar. So how to modify this kind of situation and whether adding other additives would create a skepticism in the market if people prefer more natural product. Yeah, more or less about the theme from previous questions, but address the different things here also. Please.
Yeah. So I think, and you can join on this. So similar to the previous question, what we need is an ingredient innovation that can help enhance the flavor profile, the taste, and the texture of these products. And these innovations are continually happening. And one of the things that I see like from different startups is like they start to use like fermentation product to make a functional ingredient that will enhance the taste and flavor profile. As I mentioned in my presentation, actually this company motive is actually make the cow myoglobins to be an ingredient. And these myoglobin will actually help enhance the taste for sure and of probably the color of the product as well. So to address this question, yes, there are innovation to try to help improve taste and texture, while at the same time appear to be more natural and more friendly to the clean label movement.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think I just really quickly add on to that. Even in the plant-based space, the companies that have been looking to do innovations of this type haven't been doing it for that long. So a friend of mine that used to work for GFI, he joined one of these companies very early on, and as a food scientist, and he said before 2015, basically no one was looking at actually recapitulating the flavor and taste of meat in plant-based alternatives. So even though these products are available now, they've still only had a very short period of time to innovate, and a lot more money and researcher attention is going into them now. So even though I'm sorry I had a bad experience with that product, there's a lot of rapid improvements happening, and I'm sure there'll be much better ones available at Burger King in the near future.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think I will continue with the questions from Edwin Hadrian, is our faculty. And then he's interested in how many product spectrum can be made using a targeted fermentation, whether this will employ a multi-stage process, and then what are the strategies to improve the cost efficiency in the lab-grown meat production?
Sure. So I'm happy to take that one to start. So in terms of the spectrum of products using precision fermentation, I would say it's almost endless, to be honest. There are so many different proteins or other products that are part of the flavor profile of all these different products. And if you look outside of just meat and look at dairy or eggs, there's a number of different proteins that we know are very important and have very specific functional ingredients. So companies that are just starting now are just at the very surface of scraping the most obvious or most well-known molecules to try and replicate. But with the use of kind of high throughput screening, machine learning, there's a number of companies that are going to do a lot of in-depth data mining to find other molecules that aren't so obvious to us at the moment that may be very key in different flavor or functional processes. So I'd say that the spectrum is quite large. In terms of, is it a multi-stage process?
Yes.
I guess that's in terms of the actual production process itself. Well, there's the steps, as I kind of outlined in the talk, where you first look at the different optimizations. So you would do that at a kind of a lab scale, where you'd have a very small scale fermentation process, and you're actually looking at optimizing the yield. So what your fermenting microbe is producing, you can actually increase the yield of that protein, for example. But once you're getting to kind of a commercial stage, you'll have the main microbial biomass fermentation stage, where the microbes are replicating and producing the protein. And then after that, you'll have the stages of downstream processing. So for precision fermentation, you have to actually get that protein out of the microbe and create it as a purified ingredient. So that can take a number of processing steps that are going to be specific to your organism and ingredient that you're looking to isolate. So there are a number of stages, but at the commercial level, these processes are already known and understood. It's just optimizing them for your specific application. And then looking at improving the cost efficiency in lab-grown meat. There's a number of strategies that different companies are approaching. Given it's such a nascent field, it's hard to nail down the main areas, I guess, the main conceptual areas that companies are focusing on. The first is that media broth or cell culture that I mentioned. At the moment, the culture media represents about 50 to 90% of the cost of producing cultivated meat products. And that's because the ingredients used in that, both the process to produce them and the amounts and types of ingredients to use in the broth, haven't been optimized for cost. Previously, they've been used for cell therapy and other culture applications where cost has not been the driver. It's been, or in the medical industry, cost is much less of a driver as people and governments are willing to pay a lot more for those types of products. So companies really have been able to achieve those massive cost reductions at the moment by optimizing the broth ingredients and actually finding alternative ways to produce them, which has allowed for orders of magnitude price drops. Also, the types of cells you use is another area where there's a lot of potential efficiency gains. So you can use different cell types. You can also use different types of stem cells, which have different rates of growth. You can also look at genetic modification to improve that as well, though a lot of companies are shying away from that, given that there can be regulatory concerns around that. But in the future, I think that will also be an area. And then the most unknown area to improve cost efficiency is in that bioprocess design. So the actual, what will this look at like in a commercial situation? We know how to do this in a lab where you're growing cells in a Petri dish or in a small bioreactor that's, say, 10 liters. But once you get to a bioreactor that's 1,000 liters or 10,000 liters, we're still figuring out what type of bioreactor do we use? How high a density can we grow our cells in them? So there's a number of questions like that that still need to be solved, and companies are seeking to solve.
Okay. So it's indeed it's a long way to go. There are another 3 questions which maybe I just combine. One is in relation to this alternative protein, in relation to the food sustainability, whether it could also answer to that questions of the food sustainability. And then the second one is about food safety aspect, because this is also the emerging technologies. And then the third one is in relation to the aspect, is there any disadvantages of taking this? I mean, for example, those who have allergy or who have a certain intolerance towards the component in the plant-based diet. Please, maybe Dr. Dean and Dr. Nutakul to answer this, please.
I think in terms of sustainability, we believe that it's going to be a combination of alternative protein that would help us solve that problems, because there will be consumer who really don't like plant-based meat. And they themselves, so that category of consumer probably will be more willing to try, say, culture meat or even like protein from fermentation, right? So because food is very personal, so that's why we are looking at different type of products to be available for the general consumer. And for in terms of safety, I see in the comment that they ask about for people who have gluten allergies or even soy allergies, and this is why it is important for us to try to explore alternative crops as a raw material of the plant-based meat, so that we can find hypoallergenic crops, and that would be consumer friendly in terms of allergenicity. And I think I'll let Dean answer the safety question regarding the culture-based meat.
Yeah, so in terms of cultivated meat safety, again, Singapore has taken the lead in actually beginning to establish a safety framework. And so many of the companies worldwide are seeking to get their products approved in Singapore so that they can get on the market and consumers can start trying them. Singapore has a very robust food safety system, and they engaged a large panel of food safety experts. They also had medical experts looking at potential cancer considerations, given we're working with cells that have extended cell growth. But they found that there was no issue with working with these cell types. And it's important to remember that these are the same cells that we are eating in conventional meat. It's just from a different source. And when we're eating them, the cells have already been killed and processed. So it's very safe from that consideration. And we have lesser potential for microbial contamination, as you don't have to harvest these meats next to the digestive tracts of animals that are full of different bacteria that can lead to food safety issues. So it actually has some market advantages over conventional meat in that area as well.
Okay. Yeah. So we have more questions here. I hope we still have some more time. I think okay. Here, Ms. Ariska asked about the plant-based meat is using from protein isolates will require water and energy. So how this will answer to this sustainability?
So again, you know, currently these plant protein are like the way that they process raw material hasn't been focusing on extracting the protein. So the protein is actually a byproduct, meaning that in the process design, they haven't considered how to efficiently, you know, purify or fractionate out this protein because they were focusing on some other components such as like either fat or carbohydrates. So the optimization of these processes will actually bring down those costs of energy and water. And despite like all of that, it's still more sustainable than animal like agriculture production.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that. So we've done some techno-economic analyses and life cycle analyses where we've looked at all of the inputs that go into these products and how much of the product you get out. And even though these processes aren't optimized, they still use far less water, energy, and land to create a plant-based product than getting a traditional meat product, as it requires a huge amount of energy, water, and other resources to get the meat into a product that you eat.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. And then this questions from Tivani is about what is your opinion, which of these three utilization of alternative proteins is most feasible to be further developed by companies, time-wise, cost-wise, as well as market interest-wise? Very challenging question, this one.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's an issue of which one is most feasible. I think all three are definitely feasible, and companies are succeeding in all three pillars at the moment. And it's important to remember that the market that this is looking to take a share of it's a $1.5 trillion meat market. So it's incredibly huge. And for us to even get, 1% to 5% of that market is billions of dollars, if I've done that right. So I don't think there's an issue that you have to worry that one is less feasible than another, as the share of market that it's looking to penetrate is huge, that there's still opportunities for new companies in all of these pillars, especially when you look at within the Asia Pacific market, that it's much less developed here. And in a country like Indonesia, especially, there's very few companies that are actually looking at this area.
Okay. And maybe this is the last question, and I think we go back to the consumer side here. This is from Kayla. She said that I was wondering and confused whether why plant-based foods are trying to mimic meat instead of making it into its own food. Would it be better to label it as soy patty, for example, instead of plant-based meat? Maybe, and also another question is why we just consume tofu tempeh instead of plant-based meat or patty burger, soy burger.
So I think I can start trying to answer this question, and then Dean can chip in whichever that will be a good additional. It's a very good point. And I think like the background of plant-based meat 2.0 is that we actually trying to target a mainstream consumer because we try to reach a wider audience. And that is why to kind of reduce the hurdle of them to try these products. Originally, plant-based meat or mimicking the actual meat product is the target. But however, there are some company like a startup in China that actually do not call themselves as a mock meat or alternative meat. However, they generate a brand name for their product and use this product in the menu and like feature this product. And I think that will be the direction of like when the market is more developed, this will be the direction that will go towards.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess just to add to that, when Dr. Nutakul started this presentation and talked about the environmental and other issues that we are focused on, we need to try and target as large a segment as possible. And the largest segment of consumers want meat. They don't want a soy product necessarily. So that's why it's important that we kind of present it this way to consumers to try and get as many interested as possible.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe I will just take one more question because he is a high school student. So congratulations, Jason, to join this, and he also showed an interest. That I was wondering, is there any difference between the taste of real meat and cultivated meat, and then whether there is any negative impact? I think for the negative impact, it has been addressed, but for the taste.
Yeah, so I guess there's different elements to that. So it's the exact same, if you're using a meat cell and a fat cell and connective tissue cells in the same ratio that you would get in a traditional meat product, then you are going to get a very similar taste. Where there might be a bit of a difference is it depends on what is in the media that you feed to the cells, because the cells are going to take up whatever nutrients you provide to them, and those nutrients can have an impact on flavor. So that's a really good question, and that's actually an active point of research at the moment, because no research papers have actually looked at that. So that this is just going to how new a field this is. So a number of private companies, I'm sure, have looked at this, but we haven't actually got open access research to look at that. But we think there'll definitely be, if you have different amino acids, which have a really strong impact on flavor, it's potential that if you put high levels of them in the media, it'll change the taste of the product that you get out. But at the base level, this is still meat. And if you have the meat and fat, you'll still get that meat and fat flavor. It'll just be more about the nuance of, does it taste like this particular beef that's grown in this region with this food, or versus this beef grown elsewhere on this different type of feed? Similar to how you might have grass-fed or grain-fed beef having different flavors.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for very excellent, wonderful presentation. It's really open to our new perspective of this alternative proteins or plant-based meat. And thank you very much for all the audience for attending this webinar. And hopefully Dr. Dean Powell and Dr. Wasamon Nutakul, we could be together again in having this kind of sessions to give the updates, and as well as if our students or our faculty would like to contact you, I will, please allow me to give your contact to them, because we do have some research, our faculties as well as our students already have done some research on this area, let's say, on the plant-based. So I think this year we have about 4 or 5 undergraduate thesis on plant-based proteins.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting us and having us here to present, and thanks everyone for attending. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please, for all the audience, please fill in this evaluation survey. Thank you for your attendance, and We see you again in the future webinar from I3L.